Hello and welcome to our conversations. I'm Andy Hodges and this is SADC Prime broadcasting to you from our studios in Harare, Zimbabwe. Now to all of you, of course, watching us online via Zim Papers TV network, our Facebook page and all other Twitter handles at SADC Prime. We'd like to hear from you. So delete your comments coming through on the conversations that we're having right here on SADC Prime on our conversations. Now all of you should know by now, of course, that Zimbabwe is currently hosting the SADC 44th Heads of State and Government Summit here in the capital, Harare. All 16 nations in SADC are represented, and of course, our President Edie Mnangagwa has assumed the chairmanship of SADC. Now, of course, as we are in the summit, they've organized several side conferences and events, including the SADC Industrialization Conference and gatherings focused on crucial themes such as climate change, food and nutrition security, and gender equality. And in light, of course, of the recurring climatic challenges, including a severe drought triggered by the El Niño phenomenon, the UN, SADC and its member states have been collaborating closely to implement anticipatory measures earlier and coordinated responses to mitigate the drought's impact. Today, I'm honored to have His Excellency Edward Kallon, the UN resident and humanitarian coordinator for Zimbabwe, in the studio to discuss the shared goals of SADC and the United Nations in achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its 17 goals. Your Excellency, welcome to Zim Papers and, of course, welcome to our conversations. We deeply value our partnership with the UN in advancing public and common good through initiatives like the Sustainable Development Goals, gender equality, climate action, good governance, and pro-poor policies. Your Excellency, the SADC region faces significant climatic challenges, including the recent El Niño-induced drought and the potential threat of La Niña, which could lead to flooding. Now, can you elaborate on the collaboration between SADC and the United Nations in addressing these ongoing climatic shocks? What outcomes do you anticipate from the SADC summit that's actually currently going on regarding climate action?
As you are aware, SADC is a sub-regional organization, and consequently, its engagement with the UN is multi-layered, that is global, regional, sub-regional, and country level. There is a commitment from SADC member states to integrate and also support sustainable development and to continue addressing climate change, adaptation, and mitigation. Through the treaty that establishes SADC, the member states have actively participated in the ratification of major multilateral environment agreements and also put in place mechanisms to implement these multilateral environment agreements. For example, SADC member states have a protocol on environmental management for sustainable development, which formed the basis for the development of the SADC Strategic Action Plan. This strategy is in line with the global norms and aims to achieve global and continental objectives as set by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the African Union Commission, and the Regional Development Agenda. The SADC Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan outlines sector-specific strategic interventions for adaptation and mitigation. The UN development system at country level then supports member states in the implementation of these strategies. The other key multilateral environmental agreement is the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. The SADC member states have an action program to combat desertification, which mirrors the action plan developed by the African Union. This action plan addresses the land, energy, and water nexus, and relevant and mandated agencies, funds, and programs are all supporting member states to implement this action plan. Specific to the humanitarian needs occasioned by the recent 2023-24 El Niño phenomenon, UN country teams in the various countries of SADC communities supported the elaboration of the SADC consolidated US $5.5 billion humanitarian appeal. In Zimbabwe, the UN system has developed a US $430 million humanitarian appeal to complement the US $3.2 billion appeal by the government of Zimbabwe after declaration of the national emergency by His Excellency President Mnangagwa. Through this UN appeal, the UN will reach approximately 3.1 million Zimbabweans through various interventions in food security, nutrition, livelihoods, water and sanitation, and protection.
Ambassador, I do have an interesting question for you, because for SADC to evolve from an intergovernmental entity and into a robust economic bloc, what steps do you think are necessary to enhance the free movement of people, goods and services? How can this transform SADC into a constructive model in alignment with the African Continental Free Trade Area?
This is a very interesting and difficult question, but at the same time very simple. I think the answer to this question lies in how the principles of subsidiarity will be upheld within the African Continental Free Trade Area and the various sub-regional economic commissions in Africa. The regional economic commissions are the building blocks of the AFCFTA, which is built on the principles of recognition or preservation of what already exists. You will recall that the SADC already had pre-existing protocols on trade in goods and services. However, there has been a slow pace in the domestication of legal instruments meant to facilitate the free movement of people in SADC. Currently, the SADC Protocol on the Facilitation of Movement of Persons of 2005 is not yet in force because it has not been ratified by the requisite two-thirds majority of the sub-regional architecture. It is also said that some of the provisions of the protocol make it difficult to realize the intention to facilitate the free movement of people.
Ambassador, given the scale of the summit that we're actually currently having, how do you envision fostering an inclusive dialogue that genuinely captures the voices and aspirations of marginalized groups? This includes women, youth, persons with disabilities, and of course, minority communities.
The 44th SADC Summit seems to be well focused on the issues of industrialization. The planned meetings that have been scheduled ahead of the meeting seems to specifically speak to the themes in the Industrial Week, the Finance Committee meeting, the Council of Ministers, the Badia Investment Forum, the public lecture and the troika of ministerial and other organ meetings. Despite a very focused summit, we know overall that SADC has 5 pillars of indicative strategic development plans for the period 2020 to 2030, and Pillar 3 is on human and social capital development, and this is particularly focused on opportunities for all citizens in the region. Also has a special focus on women, youth, people with disabilities and minorities, and special instruments have been developed to enhance this. I have also been informed that there will be side events on ending child marriage campaign and one of the first ladies on the environment. So some side dialogue will be definitely taking place, and it will have people's concerned.
Your Excellency, there's an issue, of course, about the 2030 deadline. Here I'm talking about achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. What actionable steps need to be taken to ensure that all 17 goals are realized within the SADC region by 2030?
And 2023 was a critical milestone in September, as the world reached the halfway point in the journey to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. On average, globally, only 16% of the Sustainable Development Goal targets are on track to be achieved by 2030, with the remaining 84% demonstrating limited or a reversal of progress. At the global level, SDG progress has been stagnant since 2020, with SDG 2, Zero Hunger, SDG 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities, SDG 14, Life Below Water, SDG 15, Life on Land, and SDG 16, Peace, Justice, and Strong Institutions, which is particularly off track. Globally, the 5 SDG targets on which the highest proportion of countries show a reversal of progress since 2015 include obesity rates under SDG 2, press freedom under SDG 16, and the Red List Index, and other nitrogen management concerns, principally due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which derailed progress in most areas. But there's still some work being done and we are happy with the rudimentary progress on child mortality rates and also infrastructure and service investments that are taking place. At the summit in 2023, the SG unveiled 6 transitions as investment pathways to accelerate delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals. These transitions are 1, jobs and social protection, sustainable and equitable food systems, transforming education system, energy access, digital public infrastructure and access, and climate change, biodiversity, and pollution. Now, to accelerate implementation of these transitions, we need to look at 4 key enabling factors. These include the policies and regulatory frameworks, the design of bankable projects that can either deliver at the required scale, the financing mix required to implement these projects, and capacity building for institutions to implement these interventions. Our push as the United Nations is to see these transitions and other relevant planning documents and the medium-term expenditure frameworks used as an entry point for investment priorities.
Ambassador, an interesting question I have for you now. What valuable lessons can Zimbabwe share with other SADC countries regarding the collaboration between the United Nations and the Zimbabwean government in promoting social, economic and democratic governance that leaves no one behind?
I think I have been in this business for quite some time, and I've worked with the UN for over 30 years in various countries and regions and in many capacities. The days when the UN was Minister of Finance, Agriculture, etc. are no longer, or they are well gone. We need to put host governments in the driver's seats, and they must own and lead their development process. This is the message we have for all countries. Our role as the UN is to listen, advise, and accompany governments.
Ambassador, thank you for this interview. Now, just some final thoughts that you may have that you'd like to share, of course, with ATN Prime viewers.
The last few years have not been very good for multilateralism as a tool to address the wide array of global challenges facing the international community. Experiences from the COVID-19 crisis saw advanced economies mopping up vaccines and other health products. You heard about the vaccine nationalism concept, which led to inadequate distributions that particularly hit developing countries, especially in Africa. This lack of solidarity has eroded the trust that countries can come together to address other global crises like climate change and the implementation of global instruments like the Paris Agreement. The crisis of the current financial architecture also appears to have hit the global south the hardest, with rising interest rates, unbearable debt burdens, and rising food and fertilizer prices due to the ongoing Ukraine crisis. Global institutions have also not been seen as broad enough and have not provided adequate space and voice for developing countries in economic decision-making, norm setting, and global economic governance. And as I also mentioned earlier, we are also not on track to meet the SDG goals and targets. Next month, September 2024, the Secretary General will be hosting the Summit of the Future, which we think is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to enhance global governance and reaffirm existing commitments, including the SDGs and the United Nations Charter. The summit will also be an opportunity to reinvigorate the multilateral system and position it to positively impact people's lives. As an outcome of the summit, we anticipate a pact for the future along the following critical priorities. 1, sustainable development and financing for development. 2, international peace and security. 3, science, technology and innovation and digital cooperation. 4th, youth and future generation. And 5th, transforming global governance. The summit offers a unique opportunity to reshape multilateralism for the future and ensure its global inclusivity. My call is for SADC member states to rally behind the pact and ensure that it is endorsed at the summit. We shouldn't lose this opportunity to reshape the future of multilateralism. At its best, our success in the SADC region will depend on inclusivity and democratic reforms. These 2 critical pathways.
That was Ambassador Edward Kallon. He's United Nations resident humanitarian coordinator for Zimbabwe. Thank you, Ambassador, for talking, of course, to ZTN Prime and appearing on our conversations. These conversations are important. The United Nations and Zimbabwe have worked very closely together over the years, and I would like to thank the United Nations and Your Excellency for sharing your insights on these critical issues. We also appreciate your commitment and, of course, our commitment as ZTN Prime in advancing sustainable development in Zimbabwe and the broader SADC region. Well, as you know, the SADC summit ends today, Sunday, and of course their work still continues for over the next year. Zimbabwe assumes the chairmanship under the President Edie Mnangagwa, and I'm assuming, of course, and I know, of course, that the cooperation with the United Nations and the Zimbabwean government will continue and go from strength to strength, as will the cooperation with the UN and other SADC nations. Well, I'm Andy Hodges. You've been watching our conversations. All I can say is goodbye, good night, and please, you all be safe.